Pope Leo named a new bishop in China. What does this mean vis-a-vis the Vatican-China deal? Is this a new direction or a continuation? The Prayerful Posse will tell you next. Welcome to Arroyo Grande series, The Prayerful Posse, where we dive into matters of faith and its impact on culture. Let's convene the posse. Joining me now, Father Gerald Murray, canon lawyer of the Archdiocese of New York, and Robert Royal, editor-in-chief of The Catholic Thing. And I'm Raymond Arroyo. Vatican journalist Diane Montagna will join us a little later. Go subscribe to the Arroyo Grande podcast now on iHeart, Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube at Arroyo Grande Show. We don't want you to miss an episode of The Posse. We've been covering, gents, the Vatican's secret deal with China for years. Essentially, it allows Chinese authorities the right to approve and even choose bishops, allegedly with the Pope's approval. At least that's how it's supposed to work. They actually appointed two bishops after the death of Pope Francis, when there was no pontiff to approve anything. The Vatican has acknowledged that the Chinese have repeatedly violated that secret deal. Now Pope Leo XIV has appointed Bishop Joseph Lin Yantuan as auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of Fuzhou in China. The CCP has approved the appointment. So, Father, is the Pope signaling that he will continue to abide by the China deal, or is there something else happening?
I think that's what's happening, Raymond. You know, the China deal is in. He didn't sign it. It was signed by Pope Francis and the Cardinal Secretary of State, Parolin. So he's continuing to work within that framework. The interesting thing was that he chooses now to make a Vatican sanction or approval of an auxiliary bishop who had been in the underground church.
Yes.
And from what I've read, he has this underground bishop now is being recognized by the Chinese Communist government because the bishop that he's going to be an auxiliary to had a good opinion of him and they got along. So there's not a lot of clarity on what led to this, but that's the way the whole China deal's been. But at least we have now a Vatican approval of someone who was in the underground church, therefore was a very faithful Catholic for all those years.
He is a 73-year-old bishop, Bob, who was consecrated, as Father said, clandestinely in 2017, reportedly an underground bishop, loyal to Rome. How do you read this, Bob? Is this, I mean, it is the first time the Pope has actually put forward a nominee that was approved, whereas in the past they were imposed and Francis just said yes.
Well, I have to say, I mean, I'm trying to be hopeful about this. We're dealing with a communist regime, and we know what that means. I mean, they are perfectly happy to manipulate and look like they're cooperative when they want, and they think it might be to their advantage. But of course, as you just said, Raymond, when there was no Pope, they just went right ahead and appointed two bishops. Yeah. I have to say, my heart kind of sank when Matteo Bruni, the spokesman for the Vatican, said that the Chinese had accepted the nomination by Pope Leo, as if, oh wow, you know, gee, they actually agreed to somebody that we sent over there. Now, look, he seems to be a good guy. He existed in the underground church, which has been under oppression and threat, and we still don't know what is ultimately going to happen with that. People like Cardinal Zen are very worried because it may mean the end of the underground church, and they may be integrated, and that seems to be part of the scheme of this agreement. One of the things that worried me the most in the news stories that I saw is that he agreed. He said he was perfectly loyal to the regime. He would, he would try to help all Chinese to be loyal and good citizens of communist China, and he accepts Sinicization as the framework for his activities, which I hope don't include the church, because what we know of Sinicization means, putting up pictures of President Xi and rewriting the Gospels in certain places. So, look, it's a mixed bag, but I don't like it. I don't trust communists. I think that the signs are still very ambivalent. I hope it goes well. But boy, it would take, let's say, several miracles for that to happen.
Yeah, I've heard two possibilities here. One saying Leo is keeping the Francis-China deal alive. The other claim, and I've heard this from some folks who've been in China, They claim that this is the first time the Pope has made the first move and actually appointed a bishop. Francis accepted the people China sent over, at times dislocating sitting licit bishops. So, Father, what do you believe to be true here?
I really wish I knew, Raymond. It's interesting to hear that information because it was presented as a Vatican initiative that the Chinese government agreed to.
Yeah.
Now the question is, was there a back channel communication before that was published which said, "Go ahead, send it to us, we'll approve it." And what Bob says is very troubling. The synicization of the Church makes China and its government the primary object of loyalty, and then the Church is a servant of that government and that country, which we never say. I'm God's servant first and then the king's.
It also turns the Church and every Mass into a propaganda tool for the Chinese communists. I mean, they're inserting Xi and Mao into the stories of the gospel, like they walk onto the scene. I mean, this is crazy. And everybody under 18 is forbidden from going to Mass. I don't see how the Church can accept this at all. Bob, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I mean, look, Leo has been presented with a very bad situation. So maybe you're right that what he's trying to do here is keep this thing alive for the time being. Pope Francis himself admitted that there were going to be Chinese Catholics who were going to suffer under the new regime, but he just was willing to accept that because he and Cardinal Parolin kept saying, you can't go on forever with this divided church in the country. But I don't know that this is a solution. It seems to me that the synicization goes so far as to say that there shall be no loyalties to entities outside of China.
Right.
And so the church that is in communion with Rome, and this was a sticking point that Benedict XVI always brought up, it's a matter of ecclesiology, that the church has got to be the church. And the church has got to be in union with the successor of Peter. It can't be run entirely by the government and whatever connections it allows to a place like Rome. That's just a concession because the focus is internal to China. It's worrisome.
We have to watch this deal and how it progresses. And I mean, it's a Faustian bargain for those poor people, though, under the boot of communism. Another story this week we've been covering: the Vatican appears to have finally removed artwork by disgraced Jesuit Father Marko Rupnik from its official websites. The use of Rupnik's artwork has persisted, not only on Vatican sites, but in Catholic churches and facilities around the world. Not long ago, Vatican press officials had claimed the Rupnik art should remain because we're all sinners. Bob, what do you think drove this turnabout?
Well, we can't tell because there hasn't been any explanation coming out from the Vatican press office, but it's not hard to imagine that the people, there seems to be a particular figure who was loyal to Rupnik, a woman who was part of the Vatican press office, and it seems like she was protecting the brand, so to speak. She was keeping those images up on the website. It's not hard to imagine that other forces now within the Vatican press office know that the boss doesn't like this. Even if he didn't order it explicitly, you just get the impression from Pope Leo that that's not him. That Rupnik, for some reason, as a Jesuit and then an ex-Jesuit, continued to be protected by Pope Francis or by somebody for some reason. That seems to have disappeared. So whether this is a sea change or it's just a kind of a recognition that, look, we're not going to do that anymore, it's still a good thing.
Father, why did it take the death of one pope and the election of another to do the right thing here? And I mean, this man is charged with horrible crimes.
Yeah, no, the Rupnik case is going to be a case study in the failure of the pontificate of Pope Francis, and I think it was motivated by his personal appreciation of Rupnik without taking due consideration of the complaints of Rupnik's victims. Rupnik was found guilty of having absolved someone with whom he had sexual relations. That's a canonical violation that results in excommunication. And the only one who can lift that is the Pope. Well, about 2 weeks after this penalty was imposed, he was freed from it. It was lifted. There was no explanation. But it's clear that could only be the Pope or the Pope authorizing a delegate to go ahead and do it. Then Rupnik was investigated a couple of times. The evidence was brought forward. The Jesuits decided we have to do something. So they start an investigation. Rupnik would not cooperate with the investigation.
Yeah.
And as a member of a religious order, if the superior says show up for an interview, you got to do it. He was thrown out of the Jesuits. Then the Vatican said, well, we can't prosecute him because there's a statute of limitations. Even though the statute of limitations is regularly waived in Vatican proceedings. Pope Francis was asked about it by an interviewer. He said, well, you know, we always waive it if it's sexual abuse of a minor, but with adults it's something different. Now that standard that standard just made me want to fall back and get sick. Rupnik was taking advantage of novice nuns.
Yeah, nuns.
And he was claiming that there was a spiritual purpose to sex abuse, and it helped him to be a good artist. Now, you know, you watch enough crime shows to know criminals know how to lie and manipulate people very well. And that's what happened here.
And those who are pathological use their sin, use their crime, and create relics of them, by the way, like little mementos. That's what happened here. He abused these poor sisters psychologically, physically, and then used the outpouring of that sin in the artwork that's all over the place, in churches. I mean, I think it's profane art and really should be removed. I'll give quick to both of you before I go to Diane Montagna. Bob, your thoughts on this?
Raymond, I think somebody, I don't remember who said this, but somebody made the point that, look, Caravaggio was no saint. He was a great artist, but he was no saint.
No.
But he never used his sinfulness to advance his art.
Yeah.
And then on top of this, and I think this is the most pressing point of all in a church that is trying to finally turn the page on this abuse crisis, that the victims are still alive. And that every time they go into a place where those images are up, you know, they must be triggered. They must be traumatized in some fashion. And other people who've been sexually abused. I mean, here in Washington, D.C., where I live, they've covered over the Rupnik mosaics in the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception. The same with the Knights of Columbus up in New Haven. So, you know, if a woman comes in who's been abused, she's confronted, and people know about this. They aren't immediately having in their face images that were produced out of sacrilegious activities that they're almost unprecedented in the history of the church.
No. And the fact that there's sexual abuse only takes it to another level. For more on what took place at the Vatican this week, we are joined by Diane Montagna, Vatican journalist and an honorary Prayerful Posse member. Diane, I want to start with the Rupnik case. He was tried, he was excommunicated, and then he was restored, and later the statute of limitations were lifted. Where does this stand now?
Yes, well, I mean, Raymond, the latest that we've heard from the Vatican is that, in a sense, it's very slow-moving and it's stalled. The last we heard from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith is that they couldn't find the judges, appropriate judges, to take care of this case. I think in part because there has been so much media attention to this case, where they become concerned that perhaps the judges' view might be biased a bit from all of the reporting that there's been in the media, but it has been slow-walked for quite some time now. Though I expect, I mean, the signs that we're seeing now in terms of even the Rupnik art being taken down from the Vatican news site, I think is a sign, and is widely seen here in Rome as a sign that the tide may be shifting in regard to Rupnik.
Did you have any other conversations about this week?
Yeah, so I've talked to a couple of people. Of course, Nico Spuntoni, the Italian journalist, wrote a great article explaining everything for the Nuova Bussola, Daily Compass, in which he pointed out that it was Cardinal O'Malley that a year ago wrote a letter to the Pope requesting that, and to the Dicastery for the Secretariat for Communications, requesting that this art be taken down specifically from the Vatican news site, but nothing was done. So, I mean, I've talked to some people like within the Vatican who deal with in this realm, and they say that. So, one thing is that, you know, no one in the ordinary office of Vatican News knew anything about this happening. Most of them found out from the media. Now, what that suggests is that this was taken care of, certainly at a high level. Was it And people say that Paolo Ruffini, the prefect for the Secretariat for Communications, had to have been involved. And then another key figure, that would be Natasha Govikar. She's written books with Rupnik. She has a good relationship with Rupnik. And she's a Slovenian theologian, and she's the current director of the Theological Pastoral Department of the Secretariat for Communications. And this is a position she's held since 2016. By and large, it's interesting to know the Rupnik images appeared on to illustrate either feast days or saints' days on the Vatican website. And that was her department. She was a friend of Rupnik. And so they continued, despite pleas, even from the victims, to be taken down.
Outrageous.
So
it's just outrageous.
Yeah, it's thought even that this was a preemptive move from the head of the Secretariat for Communications, seeing that maybe the tide is turning, or there was a call from higher up saying it needs to come down.
Central to this Rupnik case, I mean, you mentioned Cardinal Tuccio Fernandez, the head of the doctrinal department at the Vatican. He's the person charged with finding the judges in that case. There was a report, Diane, earlier this week that the Pope had met with Fernandez and decided to extend his leadership at the Dicastery of the Doctrine of Faith. But there have been a lot of problems with that initial report. Is there any credibility to this?
Well, I think this really has to be treated as a rumor at this point, Raymond. There was one report that came out. It was based on anonymous sources, and certainly sometimes anonymous sources can be correct. But in this case, one article out in Spanish media, perhaps the person who wrote it was thinking of the temporary confirmation that Pope Leo has given to all of the dicastery heads. I just think that it's way too early to assume that report is correct.
And for those joining us late in the game, Cardinal Fernandez was the ghostwriter of a lot of Pope Francis's works, including The Blessing for Gay Unions, Laudato Si, the climate encyclical. Anything I'm missing?
Well, there was the document on apparitions, human dignity. But I mean, certainly, Raymond, the most, one thing that Pope Leo has stressed practically every time that he's spoken from the beginning of his pontificate is his particular desire for unity and communion. And that he's spoken explicitly about how he sees that he rightly sees that unity as rooted in Christ. The closer we are to Christ, the more united we are amongst ourselves. The further we get away from him, so that is certainly something he's made a priority. So the idea, I think we should take the report about Cardinal Fernandez with a grain of salt, because surely the Pope knows what a controversial and even, I hate to say, scandalous figure Cardinal Fernandez is for some of his writings from years ago.
Diane, Pope Leo had a meeting this week that got too little attention, really, because, again, it's a prism into where he is, where his mind is, how he regards the church and priests within it. He met with the priests of Rome, and he told them, quote, "You are all precious in the eyes of God and in the realization of his plan. I ask you this with all my heart, of a father and a pastor. Let us all commit to being credible and exemplary priests." How did this message startle people in Rome? I mean, it's very different from that of his predecessor.
Oh, it went over very, very well among the priests, Raymond. I mean, I spoke to a few priests, different backgrounds, and they said, one priest said that this Pope radiates an extraordinary kindness and serenity, and it's the opposite, to be honest, of what they experienced years ago. They said the climate was so warm. I think there were 300 parish priests and maybe 5,000 clergy of Rome. And so I think it's been seen as a real triumph. The Pope, certainly, he stressed the spiritual life and the importance of priests growing in their spiritual life. As you pointed out, he thanked the priests for their service, for their dedication to the Diocese of Rome and to souls. So the message was right on. It was extremely well received and marks a very good turn for the morale among the clergy here.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that Archbishop Zanchetta, who finally left Rome after years of protection by Pope Francis, now he was set to be deported to face a prison sentence in Argentina. he was charged, found guilty of sexual malfeasance with seminarians, and not just one or two. He's now facing the music. Why was he in the Vatican for so long, Diane?
Well, he was protected by Pope Francis, which I hate to say. Pope Francis was his spiritual father, his confessor. He allowed him to come back here during, I think it coincided with the investigation itself. And he gave him a position in APSA, which takes care of the apostolic patrimony of the Holy See. And then after he served 4 months in prison, was then told by the courts that he could be allowed to serve the rest of his sentence in the monastery for health reasons. He was brought here to Rome. His time in Gemelli Hospital is very much shrouded in mystery. And just a month after Pope Leo has been elected, he's on a plane back to Argentina.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, looks like Pope Leo's cleaning out the stables, gently and quietly, but cleaning them out nonetheless. Let's hope more of that continues. Diane Montagna, thank you so much for being here. We will check in with you as the days unfold.
Great to be here with you.
Let's pick up on what Diane was telling us, Posse. Zanchetta was convicted of sexually abusing seminarians, as I mentioned a moment ago. He's been in Rome since November seeking medical treatment, which, as Diane said, there's a lot of mystery surrounding that. Now he's reportedly back in Argentina. He's going to serve a 4-year sentence at a monastery. Father, why not send him to jail?
Well, the fact of the matter is he was in jail. He was there for about 2 months or so, and then mysteriously the Argentine judicial authorities put him under house arrest, and he was living in a convent. And then while he's living in a convent under house arrest, they allow him to go to Rome allegedly for medical treatment. Well, I defy you to tell me there isn't a doctor in Buenos Aires who could take care of him. But for some reason, he was allowed to go there and spend 6 months. Now he's back. He's going to ask for have his sentence suspended, I read. And this is a man who lied to the Pope. He was originally caught because he used his cell phone to record immoral videos of himself, and he gave it to one of his media people in the diocese and said, there's some photos here of a church, and I'd like to put them on the diocesan website. The man found the video, which was disgusting, reported it to the nuncio and authorities. It got to Rome. So what does Zanchetta do? He goes to Rome and tells the Pope, well, my phone was hacked, The Anthony Weiner defense, Yeah. I mean, it's just absolutely disgusting. And the Pope treated him with kid gloves. There's a reason for that, sad to say, historically. This man was a spiritual directee when Pope Francis was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and he worked as an official in the Bishops' Conference. So Zanchetta was the first bishop named by Pope Francis. He was protected when serious evidence was shown that he was living an immoral and perverse lifestyle. Then he's convicted, and he's given all these benefits. So, no, it's a disgrace. The canonical, aside from being a crime in Argentinian law, it's a canonical crime to commit sex abuse against seminarians, which is what he's convicted of. It was announced years ago that there was a canonical process. We never heard another word of it.
Yeah.
I call upon the Holy See to tell us, is there still a canonical process? Was it terminated and we never knew? This man needs to be removed from the priesthood. He manipulated his position as a bishop to get seminarians to commit immoral acts with him. He compelled them to. The kids had no choice. This is disgusting.
Yeah. Bob, your thoughts on his quick exit to Argentina with the arrival of Pope Leo? I mean, obviously, we talked about Pope Leo earlier telling the priests, you have to live your lives fully and be credible again. That's important.
Yeah, I was struck as I was looking in the news reports about how he apparently had to have some kind of heart surgery. And I agree with you. It's hard to believe that a wealthy and pretty much developed country like Argentina doesn't have the capability of doing heart surgery. But then what happened is that he was supposed to go back sometime in April. And he continued to stay. I mean, he'd been through the process. If there was an operation, no one has come forth and actually confirmed that. But he went through whatever medical treatment and recovery took place, and then he stayed in Rome. And then all this conversation started about, is he going to go back to the monastery? Is he going to wear an ankle bracelet? Is he going to try to, get the conviction or at least the sentence commuted or something. And he's still there until the Pope dies.
Yeah.
Then when the new guy comes in, again, it's like with his, the Rupnik art, it's not hard to imagine that someone turned to him and said, look, that American Pope, he wants you to go back to South America.
Well, somebody got the message, and that's a good thing. Relative to this, the USCCB issued its 2024 report on sex abuse allegations against Catholic clergy. Now, this is restricted to July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. During that period, the abuse scandal has cost dioceses nearly $243 million. There were 902 allegations of sexual abuse by clergy, by a reported 855 victims. They say the number of allegations have dropped sharply since 2019, when there were 4,500 accusations filed. Father, some of the reportage on this story seems to focus on the sharp drop in allegations because there was some investigation of each of these charges. But, I mean, 900 and plus allegations, that's still a pretty high number.
Yes, it is. And we have to take into consideration the allegations can date before the time period that we're looking at. So in other words, not all 900 and et cetera allegations for that calendar year that they're using. Nonetheless, look at it. The sex abuse revelations came out in 2001. We started getting these when the Archdiocese of Boston was compelled to reveal what they knew. And now we're getting 900 more cases and, 800 victims. Given the possibility that there are some false accusations, that number may be a little high. But the general understanding, and canonists have looked at this over time, most of these charges are merited. In other words, something happened, something was done to somebody. This is a lot of cases.
Yeah, well,
we got to do something.
When you dig into the data, and again, the USCCB is reporting this, they claim that 7% of those allegations were deemed credible. 62% were unable to be proven, and 5% were unsubstantiated. 26% are ongoing investigations, Father. So, of course, due process should and must be followed in all these cases. But why does this issue continue to persist to such a degree, Bob, after all of the attention and time spent on this, and money?
Yeah, I wish that those numbers had been broken down a little bit differently, because there was another statistic in that reporting that was very odd. It said something like over 50% of the priests who were accused are now dead. So, it's like a polluted stream. It's bad, so you stop polluting it, and it gets a little bit purer and a little bit purer and a little bit purer. But I agree with Father. These are large numbers, and that means, unfortunately, we're not near the end of this, and we need to get a grip on this, and fast. Yeah. So the bishops seem to want to present this as if it's encouraging those. And maybe it is, but I think that they need to do a better job of explaining then why it's encouraging. If it's true that only 50% of those are really live priests today, okay, so now we're down to 450, which in 50 states is still a lot.
Yeah.
But the church has not only a difficult PR problem here, which is not doing very well at, it's also still got a disciplinary problem that I hope our bishops finally get a grip on.
Well, Bob, as our friend Cardinal George Pell used to say, moral bankruptcy usually precedes financial bankruptcy. And we've seen that in diocese after diocese. Washington, D.C., which we talked about on the show this week, New Orleans, my own diocese of New Orleans, all across the country. You see these dioceses declaring bankruptcy because they paid hundreds of millions of dollars over this scandal. And still there doesn't seem to be an intentionality to either screen these candidates or make sure that everybody's towing the line here. It's an ongoing problem. Moving on to another story, big one this week. The protests and riots in Los Angeles that have resulted in ICE, the immigration enforcement raids in that city. Last week, on Friday, June 6th, Archbishop Jose Gomez of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles issued the following statement. We all agree, quote, We all agree that we don't want undocumented immigrants who are known terrorists or violent criminals in our communities. But there is no need for the government to carry out enforcement actions in a way that provokes fear and anxiety among ordinary, hardworking immigrants and their families. Other nations have a coherent immigration policy that respects the natural rights of the people to emigrate in search of a better life and also ensures control of their borders. America should too. It's been almost 40 years since the last reform of our immigration laws. That's too long, and it's time to do something about that. End quote. Father, in that statement, Archbishop Gomez called for restraint and calm from everyone involved. Should he have made a stronger statement, do you think, condemning the violence, the anarchy on the streets, the violent attacks on law enforcement?
Well, I think a subsequent statement would have, to add to it, would have been very useful, because precisely if, they've been profane graffiti, they've been throwing objects, they've been burning cars. I mean, this isn't a protest against a police action in as much as it's kind of like an action to delegitimize the whole government, to say we're going to create anarchy in the streets until you stop exercising authority. So that's troubling. And the other thing is, why would ordinary immigrants, meaning people here legally, why would they be troubled when criminal aliens, meaning that because that's the focus of the ICE action now, and illegal aliens who are known to have committed crimes or accused of crimes, why should they be afraid when they're rounded up? Typically, illegal alien criminals live in the community with other immigrants, so they terrorize them. So that statement, unfortunately, was not supportive enough of law enforcement. And what's the context? How many million people came in under the Biden administration?
21
4
million.
to 6 million? 21 million. I thought
That's
it was
what
4 to 6.
that's what at least the current administration is reporting. That 21 million people entered the country.
The context here is not, well, there are a few people came over the border. Why bother everyone else just for a few? There's a massive load of people who are causing problems, and they were released onto the streets by the Biden administration.
And Bob, we have on the books, I mean, Archbishop Gomez mentioned the immigration reform. There are laws on the books. You can't come illegally without permission or overstay your visa in the United States. That's the law of the land. It's federal law. So I don't know what, are we just calling for open borders should be the immigration policy of the land so everybody can come and go as they please?
Yeah, I thought this was a disappointing statement from the Archbishop, who generally I think is a good man. I think he did issue another statement about people being calm and not resorting to violence. So I was glad that he did that. But look, I frequently, when this debate comes up, it frustrates me that our bishops still talk about the right to emigrate. There is no right to emigrate. You have the right to apply to enter another country. You don't have a right to enter in another country. Yeah. And you do have a right under international law if you are a refugee. Now, this is a different category. This means if you are in a country where your life is in imminent danger, say there's a terrible regime and you're a protester and they're trying to kill you and your family, yes, you have a right to asylum. I mean, you're protecting a person's life.
Right.
But we have already an immigration system. My wife is an immigrant. My wife was born in France. My wife is an immigrant, and she gets furious. I'm actually the calm one in the family about this. But she gets
That's how it is in our family too. My father gets enraged. He had
got
to
in
apply
line
as well.
They got in line, and they back in those days, you had to have a sponsoring family here who said you would not go on the welfare rolls, that they would take care of you if you couldn't find work, etc. What about the rights of the people who are not getting jobs right now, who find it hard to get housing because it's more expensive, because there is a glut of illegals and all those other secondary problems in addition to the crime. But there are those secondary problems that we need to protect against, and it's our government that has a responsibility to prevent those problems from occurring.
Before I leave this very quickly, the newly appointed Archbishop, or Bishop rather, of San Diego, he was appointed by Pope Leo just weeks ago. He's now sent out a statement, and by all indications, he is a Orthodox man. But he sent out a statement encouraging priests to go down to the courthouse and join any immigrant who's there for their hearings, just to support them so they'll be treated well. Well, Some of these people might be criminals. I mean, is everyone who came into the country just entitled to protection by the Catholic clergy? Father, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it would be better if they get a list of these people and what they're accused of. Why is it that immigration is acting against them? Aside from the fact they're here legally, because right now they're not rounding up every single person here legally. They're focusing on the people who are threats to the community.
Right.
It would be better to contact ICE and say, well, our priests are concerned. Would you inform us who these people are and what they're accused of? Because, if you've got a child molester who's been convicted in X country, gets in here, and is therefore liable to do the same thing, why should I stand next to him in line just to show support? I don't know the guy. And by the way, child molesters have no right to be in this country illegally. Yeah. So I find that to be an unreflective comment on his part.
Yeah, it's a kind of preferential option for any immigrant. I wish they had this kind of love for the Latin Mass, where we just stand with the supporters of the Latin Mass every Sunday. But if you're an immigrant, they're right there. I mean, the truth is, there was a guy who was throwing Molotov cocktails at police officers. Yeah. He was arrested just last week, charged by the L.A. U.S. attorney there. He's charged with attacking law enforcement, and then they find out he's an illegal alien who's been deported once and was charged with a grand theft auto charge back in Anaheim. I mean, these are not people we should be standing with. Bob, I'll give you the last word on this.
Well, and the laws in California are really absurd about these people. I had a friend about 20 years ago. He noticed that there was a law in California that you could get special benefits if you were not born in the United States and you were a Spanish speaker. And he was a Canadian who was as English in background as you can possibly be, but he had learned Spanish somewhere along the way. I think he lived down in Nicaragua or something. So he showed up at an office. He was a journalist, so he decided to write a story about this. I get this absurd idea. Yeah, well, I was born elsewhere. And I can speak Spanish. Hola, It's we're beginning by cleaning out the difficult persons that are here, but there's a much larger argument that's going to have to be made about what are we going to be doing, and to wait for Congress to pass some kind of big, beautiful, immigration bill. I think I've told the bishops this. They've asked me to speak to them a couple of times about immigration. I don't think that that's going to happen just because of the way our two parties are right now. But in the meantime, as unpleasant as it is sometimes to have to do these things, I don't think that ICE is going into restaurants randomly or going into Home Depots randomly. I think that they've got the goods on the people that they're going after. Mm-hmm. And for the time being, we shouldn't listen to these people who are apologizing as if these are just ordinary farm workers or, McDonald's workers. They're not. The people that we're going after right now should not be here.
Yeah. Okay, I want to end on a happy note, or a funny note at least. There was a moment at the end of Pope Leo's Wednesday audience, and an Italian bishop came up to him wearing a bucket hat, and the Pope gently tells him right here, take your hat off so we can get a picture. He does it very kind of subtly, but you can see he's clearly telling him, take the hat off. In obedience, the bishop does, and then posed for the photo. I loved this moment, Posse, because you have a pope who not only understands decorum, you don't wear a Gilligan hat in front of the Pope, but he's media savvy. Bob, I'll give you a crack at this, and then Father.
Yeah, there's no question that he has a certain sense of propriety and decorum. And in this world where everything is up for grabs, the fact of a figure like that, who clearly is a holy man, whatever decisions he made, he may make good decisions or bad decisions, but in addition to being a holy man, I think he's already impressed the world with the dignity that he's brought back to the office of Pope.
Yeah. Father, last word.
Yeah, I agree. And, everybody who's tempted to put on funny hats at Mass and make clown masses and the like, better pay attention. The Pope is conscious. And by the way, in the world we live in, a photograph is forever and it can be everywhere. And it can, the Pope doesn't want bishops showing up in Gilligan hats, as you say. Those are for the golf course. I mean, that goes back to Caddyshack, those kind of hats are really old, and I don't think.
Well, they're back in vogue, Father. All the kids are
wearing
them. That's why.
Here we are. Okay.
And I get it. You're in the sun. You're outside for a general audience. But when you come up to see the Pope, take the hat off. Yeah, gents, we will leave it there. Posse, look. If you want more of the Arroyo Grande Prayerful Posse, please subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube or Arroyo Grande Podcast, wherever you get yours. On behalf of Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray, until the posse rides again, stay the course, follow the light. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Bye, guys. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with iHeart Podcasts and is available on the iHeart Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.